"What is truth?" says Pilate, a man who asks the right questions but doesn't have the courage to answer them, who compromises truth to condemn an innocent man, who sees the truth standing in front of him but does not recognize it, who turns aside from truth and follows the crowd, who chooses expediency over conscience. Jesus, arrested by Jews, was taken to the houses of the priestly elders, not for a trial, for no witnesses were called, but for questioning. He was a crowd pleaser, an inciter as they saw it, a threat to their autonomy, to the powers and privileges allowed them by their Roman rulers. He was a thorn in their side, an irritation, an obstacle to the status quo, to their being left alone to rule their own sphere, to have their laws unquestioned, their practices uncondemned. So they questioned him, searching for what? Did they suppose there was some secret teaching he kept for private places, some blasphemy they could reveal to repulse the following he was developing? But Jesus preached in the open, free to all, in their own synagogues and in the temple. He hid nothing. He was not contrite and stood his ground, so that violence against him was their way to get through, to provoke a reaction, to make him fearful of their power. But that failed too, and he spoke calmly still, of truth. They took him to Pilate then, to the palace, but they did not go in. To cross the door of the unbelievers would make them unclean in their version of truth. So they presented him and called for Pilate. Such sensitivities for the preservation of their purity, their spiritual and physical cleanliness, yet none for the degradation of their consciences, for the betrayal of an innocent. Pilate, not unreasonably, asks for the charges, asks to hear what crimes have been committed, that they bring a man to him for punishment. They can declare none. In truth, no laws have been broken, no property purloined, no harm done to any man, woman or child, no riot incited or personage threatened. Pilate does not want the hassle. He says, "Take him away and deal with him yourselves." And then they reveal their motive. They want him dead. "We can't execute him," they say, implying, "We want you to do it for us." And so Jesus is taken inside the palace to stand before Pilate, away from his accusers who remain outside to preserve their purity. Pilate, a classically educated man, a man used to philosophical ideas and debate, to the musings of Greek and Roman scholars, gives Jesus the benefit of a hearing. Summoning no witnesses, and though we speak of the trials of Jesus, he was not tried in truth. No man stood up to accuse him. Pilate asks him to explain the motives of the elders and the priests who have delivered him there. They toy together with the theory of kingship, of a kingdom to be fought for, of authority and purpose, of truth. And Pilate, world-weary, pragmatic, a veteran of dealings with these tiresome colonials, with their strange laws and ideas, conscious of factions and divisions in Rome as much as in Jerusalem, mindful of his own preservation, asks the question he will be remembered for down the millennia. What is truth? What is truth when truth can be manipulated, when truth depends on the speaker, the audience, the context, and the motivation? What is truth, says Pilate, and without waiting for or requiring an answer, goes outside to the Jews and attempts to absolve Jesus, to give them a chance to free him, offers him as the Passover gesture, the pardon given at festival time. The Jews want none of it and call for Barabbas to be the one freed. Pilate sends Jesus off to be flogged and returned, beaten, humiliated, in a crown of thorns and a robe of kingly purple. And again he offers the Jews a chance to set Jesus free. Look, though I find nothing to charge him with, see what I've had done to him. Is this not enough for you? Here is the man for all seasons, for all men, punished, sacrificial, a representation of all men, for all men. Enough? Not enough for the Jews who thirst for his blood. Crucify, they demand. But still Pilate clings to the rule of law and denies there is any basis for guilt, any crime committed. He is wearied of these ranting, hysterical colonials, these strangely dressed creatures with their incomprehensible, illogical, antiquated ideas. He hardly thinks of them as men like himself. He carries the racism of his day, the prejudice against the unwashed dervish, the holy man with his talismans and superstitions, so far from his own experience and belief. Pilate tries one more time to offload Jesus back to these Jews, to rid himself of the issue, the annoyance. Still they won't budge, won't let him off the hook. The Jews subsequently accuse Jesus of breaking the law of their religion, of the ultimate blasphemy of equating himself with God. They call for his death. Nothing but that will satisfy them. No fool. Pontius Pilate has been in trouble with Rome before this, for transgressing local laws and customs, for actions which stirred up the native populace, which caused embarrassment at home and in the capital. He needs to avoid doing anything that might cause more unrest, an uprising even. Unsettled by this mysterious claim to be Son of God, Pilate questions Jesus again. Where do you come from? It's not relevant to any charge, any wrongdoing, but an exasperated query from a man weary of the ridiculous situation these Jews have put him in, and anxious that he might make things bad for himself if he does not deal with it well. Jesus does not answer. Why? Perhaps he was weary too, of questions that had no answer that he could give successfully, of an interrogation whose end was foretold and immutable. Already beaten and scourged, worse was to come, he knew. And his silence stings Pilate into anger of the "don't you know who I am" variety. Don't you know what I can do to you? Pilate's idea of authority is not that of Jesus. And Jesus knows that the guilt of the situation is not Pilate's either. Both are fulfilling their duty as they know how. It is not to be expected that Pilate, with his Roman background, should recognize Jesus as Son of God and bearer of the truth. That was for the Jews to see and understand. Caiaphas, representative of the faith, bore the greater guilt. Still Pilate would have freed him. How many times now? But the Jewish leaders played their trump card, naming Caesar, playing on the fears of the governor that word would get back to the emperor. Self-interest came to the fore, and capitulation followed. He has little or no credit left in Rome. Why risk it for one deluded Jew? To the judgment seat. What irony for the future judgment of all concerned. Jesus is brought. And now Pilate draws from the Jewish leaders an affirmation of loyalty to Rome, makes them voice recognition of Caesar's power over them, a voluntary entrapment into the imperial yoke. He is gratified by their subjugation to Caesar, and by implication of the transfer of authority to him when he names Jesus as king. No king but Caesar, they declare. For himself, Pilate would have overlooked Jesus' claims to kingship, though he, as an officer of Caesar, should have been scrupulous in denying any other authority. In their hatred and fear of Jesus, the Jewish leaders ironically sell their souls and pledge to Rome, a nation which declared no law but divine law, no ruler but God, reneged on their beliefs in order to kill the Christ. And Pilate gave the order.